We are in candid camera. So, Miss Jones, what is the overall topic of this lecture?
American colonies moving toward independence.
Very good. Now, we're not at a subtopic yet because I'm going to kind of set the stage a little bit about what we're talking about. Now, Ivan, what are the American colonies? We're going back to kind of elementary because we just started today. What are the American colonies?
Isn't there like 13 colonies that came from Britain or different places?
There you go. Thank you for adding the different places. Yeah, it was a melting pot. A lot came from Britain, but the 13 colonies were 13 established colonies that came mainly from Britain, but some came from what's called the New Netherlands, and some came from what we know as Germany, and people melted potted over, okay? Now, what was the anybody, I'd be kind of impressed, what was the major reason, or one of the major reasons, Taylor, that people came to America? They just, why did they leave Britain mainly, or the Netherlands, or Germany, or wherever, to come to the United States? It wasn't the United States, so I got to make sure that was America, okay? Why did they do that? Well, that's might be partially right. It might be one reason, not the exact reason. Lauren? Very good. The first ding, ding, ding of the year. Religious freedom. A lot of them were being oppressed by the churches back in their countries they lived in, so they wanted to come to America for religious freedom. Now, Taylor's got some points, right? They didn't like the living conditions, the way things went, but a lot of it was for religious reasons, okay? And they came from all over. Now, they stayed here. Anybody know when the first people kind of got over here? Anybody know when that was? What time period did we start making this move? You know that one? You may not. Anybody know, Dalton?
Would be like the late 1600s.
Very close, very good. 1600s. Now, there were people before. We know Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 and all that, right? But people started making a push in the 1600s. John Smith, okay? What was the famous day we get off because these people came over? I mean, we're going to kind of go back into history a little bit. We've covered this much more in detail if we started in 1600. But who else came over? You get a day out of school because of it. The Pilgrims. So, yeah, Pilgrims came over, Puritans came over, people came over from every different wake but who are they still under? Who still ruled them? The king of the country. They came back, and we know this mainly as Britain, okay? So they're still ruled by the king of Britain. And then, did every single colony have exactly the same rules, regulations, and all? No, they varied, which made it kind of interesting. If you were going to try to rule, I'm trying to rule 26 colonies here, okay? And you all have your own parents that have their own rules. Is it going to be a little difficult for me to maybe run 26 kids here the way I want them run if you have your own thing at home, so to speak? It's kind of a good example. It's hard to do that, okay? And I don't know if you know a lot about what's going on, but Britain had been doing what by 1763? Do you think America was their only interest? That was their only possession? No, they were building an empire all over the world by 1763, and that might be something to write down. By 1763, Great Britain had built a giant empire across the globe. Okay, in 1763, by 1763, Great Britain's empire was worldwide. It circled the globe. They didn't just have America. They had possessions everywhere. Okay, so by 1763, Great Britain's empire would come from established claims all over the world. Now, when I'm lecturing, I want to tell you that I'll repeat things 2 or 3 times, so don't panic. Like the first time I say it, oh my God, I didn't get that, and raise your hand and tell me to start over. I'll repeat it 2 or 3 times, okay? As long as I don't get interrupted, I'll repeat more. If I get interrupted, then I don't repeat as much. Does that make sense? So we kind of go from there. So again, and I'll go slower because we're just getting used to each other. By 1763, Great Britain's empire was huge, worldwide. They had established colonies everywhere, not just America. Now, if it was hard to control 13 colonies in America, how do you think it was to manage colonies all over the world? It was not an easy thing for them. So, because of their vast claim across the world, Great Britain would encounter some problems in maintaining that worldwide empire. You understand? They got colonies everywhere, and it's hard to maintain them. So this is where we're going to kind of set up that Britain's problems in maintaining their colonies. And what are the ones we're concerned about? The ones in America. And that's going to move us toward independence, because they're going to start to have troubles maintaining all of these colonies across the world, especially those in America. So, of all the colonies they had, the American colonies in what they call the New World is going to be the most difficult to control, because we have more independent thinkers in 13 different colonies. Okay? So they're not only going to have trouble keeping grasp of all of the colonies they have across the world, they're going to especially have trouble with the ones in America. Okay? And we'll kind of explain it to you. Now, it's kind of interesting, because we go to our first ID, our identification, which is under the big topic. And what is that ID, Elise? What's the name of that guy? You pronounce that? Right here. Okay, it's Verzen. I won't hold that against you, because I have it even phonetically done on my notes here so I don't screw it up. Okay? So it's Count Verzen. And Count Verzen was from where, do you think, by the name?
France.
Very good, Ivan. You're 1 for 1 on the year. Okay, he's from France. And he was a French official who actually predicted that the British were going to have a problem in America. He was the first man to kind of look out there and say, oh, wait a minute. Man, they got these 13 colonies in America, and they got all these other colonies all across the world, and they're really going to have some trouble in America. And I'm going to give you a quote, which I'll do often in this class, that he stated concerning that. And if I tell you to write down the quote, you can write it. I want you to write it down. But if I just say, hey, here's a quote, you don't have to write it down. What I want you to do is listen to it, and I might ask Miss Wasson, what does this mean in your mind? Okay? So here's the quote that Count Verzen gave when he anticipated the problem that Britain was going to have in controlling the colonies. He said, quote, "The American colonies stand no longer in need of England's protection. England will call on them to contribute towards supporting the burden they have developed to bring on her, and they will answer by striking off all dependence." Now I'm going to read that again. I want you to think about it. The American colonies stand no longer in need of England's protection. What does that mean, Caitlin? What does he mean by it when he says, the first part of the quote, the American colonies stand no longer in need of England's protection?
Like, they're so independent that they're kind of doing their own thing already.
Very good. Like when you were 3, you really needed your parents' protection. You could wander out in the street or do something, swallow something that wouldn't be good for you, lots of things. But as you get older and get to be a junior in high school, you probably still need your parents' protection to a point, but do you need it as much as when you were 3? No, and that's what he means is America they needed, when these colonies first got set up, they needed Britain to send them supplies and trade with them and all these things. They were dependent upon Britain to survive, especially in the 1600, that area. A lot of them died of disease and all kinds of things. Well, what he's saying in that first sentence is they're starting to catch up, and they're no longer dependent. But when you don't want to be dependent, then you want to become what, Madison? Independent. Okay? Second part of that, he said, England will call on them to contribute towards supporting the burden they have helped to bring on her. On her is Great Britain, right? Read that again. Okay? England will call upon them to contribute towards supporting the burden they have helped to bring on her. What does that mean? What do you think that means, Keisha? What burden has England brought upon itself?
All the colonies.
And what do you have to do to get all these people under control? Okay, who's protecting militarily the colonies at this time? Britain. So do you think they're protecting all these other colonies as well? And what is the result of that? It cost money. So what he means by this is England's going to call on the American colonies to contribute towards supporting the burden that the English have put upon their country by having all of this empire. And how are they going to do that? That's right, we're going to get into that, taxation without representation. So he picked this up way back in 1763, okay? And then he said, and they, meaning the colonies, will answer by striking off all dependence. Morgan, what do they mean? What does he mean by that? And they, meaning the American colonies, will answer by striking off all dependence.
just say, we don't want to pay anymore, we don't need
We want to be, right, they're gonna strike off dependents. We don't wanna be dependent. Just like when you go to college, and some of these kids turn 18 and they wanna strike off their dependents from their parents until it comes to paying for the car. And then they want to all of a sudden be kind of, you can't be both. You can't say to your parents, I'm turning 18 and I don't want anything from you. Well, gee, Dad, I got to pay my rent this week. You know what I mean? So that's what we're getting at here, in a way. So kind of keep that in mind. Okay, now, think about this. How many years was it after Count Berzane made this comment did the American colonies declare their independence? Anybody want to take a guess on that by looking at the date? How many?
13.
Boy, Pete, 13 years. He predicted this 13 years before it happened. Did he have some insight or what? I mean, you think about that. That's why Count Berzane is so important, because he predicted this revolution we're going to be talking about 13 years before it ever happened, and he wasn't a British person, and he wasn't an American colonist. He was a Frenchman. He figured it out, okay? Now, this will take us to our first subtopic, Rasmussen, which is what?
Colonies faced by British.
Does that subtopic make sense to what we just talked about? It should lead right in. Problems faced by the British in governing their empire. They're going to have some problems. Okay, and I'm going to tell you about those problems. And I'm going to tell you about several, and you can bet that probably on your test I'll say, name 2 of the 3 problems the British had in governing their empire in detail. I mean, that's something you could get, just so you know. Now, I'm going to tell you 3 major problems. There are 3 major problems that they have. And if I was you, I would put that subtopic down, and I would put big 1 there and circle it. So you can bet that's going to be a topic on the test, don't you think? I'm probably going to want you to know that, the 3 problems they faced in governing. Okay. The first was the need for new, you said it before, need for new revenue or taxes. The need for new taxes. There's your first major problem that Great Britain had to deal with in governing their vast empire. I'll give you some examples. So just kind of might underline that, put 1 and underline it. Then I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean. So the need for new taxes. Why would you need new taxes, Olivia? That's right. And why would you not have any money? And you didn't get this part, so I got to kind of review. If we'd have started in 1600, you'd understood that. So, first of all, between 1689, you should write this down, between 1689 and 1763, between 1689 and 1763, Great Britain had fought 4 major wars in that period of time. From 1689 to 1763, they had fought in 4 major wars. We fought in a major war in Vietnam, and it cost $1 million a day to fight in the latter stages. $1 million a day in the latter stages. That way into the 60s and 70s. But wars cost money to fight. And these worldwide conflicts that Great Britain were in between 1689 and 1763 left the country heavily in debt. Thus, the need for new taxes. Now, to give you an example, you ever heard of the French and Indian War? Did you study that all in world history? I don't know when you cover that. Well, what was that about, Paris? You remember? Brief. I mean, I have to go into detail. What was that about?
Well, I know that the French had allies with the Native Americans, so like, where did it was, Canada?
Yeah, and over what? Over what?
Oh,
What were they going to win if they won?
Canada.
Yeah, land, right? Okay, well, just to give you an example, Britain's fight against the French and the Indians in the French and Indian War cost, in today's currency, $22 billion. So there's 1 war out of 4 that cost him in today's currency $22 billion. So can you see why they're heavily in debt? Okay, can you see that? Now, so you fought these 4 wars, you're heavily in debt. Dane, you got all these possessions across the world, and what do you have to do to protect them?
You gotta send armies to protect them.
Right, and those cost money. So because of these 4 wars, once you win the war and win the possession, do you protect it anymore? Or do you just let somebody come in and take what you just spent $22 billion to win? No, you got to pay for it. So you have to be able to maintain a military there, right, to protect it. So that's what they needed money for. They were not only in debt, but they needed money to protect what they had already won. Does that make sense? Now, who would the British Parliament or the British leaders expect to pay that debt? The people that live where? People live where, Elliot? Who's going to pay this debt? Okay, we got an unbelievable debt here. Okay, here's a pot. Okay, we'll just kind of whatever. Okay, who's going to pay this part of the debt? Elliot? Well, let's go in order of sequence. Who's the first people responsible to help pay this debt? No, the first. Who would be who is this country? Yeah, so the citizens of Great Britain, right, are going to have a burden, right? Because they live in Great Britain and they're being defended by Great Britain, right? Okay, who else do they expect to pay? Now I'll get to it. The colonies around the world, including which colonies? It works. America. So it's really not too hard to figure out that British leaders expected the American colonists to help pay English war debts. Okay? You got to remember that these colonists are loyal subjects of the king at this time. They're under British rule. Even though they might have their own rules and regulations within, Massachusetts, they still are overall under English rule, and the king and parliament, which is their government, expected to chip in. Now, what also, since they're a possession, are the British military doing in America? They're also protecting what? The American colonies, okay? So there's another reason why the British Parliament, the British King, and the leaders believe that the American colonies ought to pay. First of all, they ought to pay because they're loyal British servants, or citizens, so to speak, but also we're protecting you too. We're keeping you from getting attacked by France, or Spain, or Portugal. So there's your first problem that the Great Britain had in governing their vast empire, is the need for new taxes. Okay? Who they're going to look to pay them. Now we're going to get the second reason, which kind of goes back a little bit to what Paris and I were talking about, and that's the future of Florida and Canada. Okay, this is another reason why Great Britain had a tough time governing their big empire, was the future of Florida and Canada. Okay, now, Paris was exactly right, because what did we win in the French and Indian War? You said Canada. We also won Florida, too, okay? And we had a little bit of an issue because before the French and Indian War, you think that there were people living in Canada and Florida that weren't American colonists? And so what do you have to do when you gain that position? Or that possession, excuse me. You have to establish a new government or colony. Well, that was a little bit of an issue because the governments of Florida and Canada had to be reorganized, because who lived in Canada at the time? What type of people? What's that? That'd be the French, okay? Who lived in Florida? Spanish. So you have two different cultures that you have to go in now and reorganize them from Spanish in Florida to American colony to French in Canada to American colony. Do they mesh very well at the time? No. So that's a problem. You gotta go in there and do that. Now, let me try to make an example that would make sense. So I took over this classroom in the during American War, okay? And these 3 rows, well, these 4 rows here were living in Canada at the time that I took it over. This row here was in Florida. You're Spanish, you're French. So I've taken this over. And you stayed there. Not everybody left. Okay? French people stayed in Canada, Spanish people stayed in Florida. But I'm going to go into this bunch and say, now you have lived your life this way your entire life, and now I'm going to make you change totally opposite. How is that going to go? You think you're going to be very cooperative? No, I'm gonna go to Florida and say, now you guys decide to stay here, everybody else left, so we're gonna do things differently now, you're only gonna get eat once a day. I mean, this is exaggeratory, but you change their life totally. Can't speak Spanish anymore, speak Spanish, throw you in jail. Okay, and are you gonna react very well to that? No. So that's the example of the second reason the future of Florida and Canada is they had such a tough time getting those two areas to American way of thinking. Does that make sense? That was a difficult thing. And if they had that trouble in Canada and Florida, do you think they had the same trouble in every other colony or country they conquered? Same thing. You got to go in there and turn those people to your way of thinking. They're not real interested in that, especially after you just kick the hell out. You know what I'm saying? So just kind of keep that in mind. There's your second reason and examples. The third reason why the British had such a tough time governing their empire, especially and only in America, was the Western lands. The Western lands. Now, we'll see how kosher we are. Okay. Emily, my dear, over there in the corner, thinking I'd never call on you, and I'll get to all of you somehow. Tristan, you're about next, so be prepared. We look at the United States right here now, pretty nice map colored. Emily, where are the Western lands on this map?
On the west side.
Very good. Would this be the Western lands? I'm going to live in the West. I'm going to live in California, Washington, Oregon, maybe Nevada, maybe here. Where, Tristan, was the West in 1763? What was considered the West in America?
Somewhere near Wisconsin.
Well, I'm going to have to check my geography. Actually, he's fairly right. As history goes on, the Western lands will be lands west of what?
Mississippi.
Mississippi. At this time in history, the Western lands were considered lands west of what mountain range?